Hmm.
And same with St. Thomas More, like, oh, sure, just, say what you need to say and be on your way.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so I see a lot of him in you and in the way that you live out your life. And I like that you mentioned that he was also just very intellectual, but that he was quietly firm in what he stood for and wasn't looking to be a martyr, but that in the end he was determined to be so and not fall into what the king was asking of him.
Well, there's a backstory to the second name. Um, I ended up writing down Maximilian as my second choice, but I was secretly hoping for Maximus, not because I had a great devotion to Saint Maximus the Confessor, who's a really dope saint, but I was more enamored at the time with the pagan figure in the movie Gladiator, whose name is Maximus. I just thought it would be the coolest thing to be called Maximus as I joined religious life. Well, I told Father Dennis about this grandiose idea, and he always had a unique way of cutting you down to size real quick. And so he let me say that request, and then he said, I will call you Minimus instead of Maximus. And I immediately retracted my request and shifted from Maximus to Maximilian, which was more holy anyway, because I actually did have a devotion to Maximilian Kolbe.
I love that story so much. And I can picture him saying that. So
Oh, yeah, his Hungarian accent was very thick, and his eyes got real big. So I will call you Minimus instead.
oh, and now you're Father Thomas, so you didn't get
That's right. That's right.
yeah.
So Thomas worked out after all.
And
Mhm.
so did you obviously you picked the name, it was one of your 3. What about him kinda drew you to that name?
I was introduced to St. Thomas More's life and writings in college. So you probably remember Dr. Wegemer,
Mhm.
who's still teaching in the English department. He is one of the world's experts on the life and writings of St. Thomas More. And I had heard of Thomas More prior to coming to UD, but I really did a deep dive into his life. And I found it to be such a compelling combination of holiness, just intellectual brilliance, wit, and courage. So Dr. Wegemer's biography of Thomas More is called Thomas More, A Portrait of Courage. And I think that's most exemplified in the way he died, a martyr's death, refusing to give in to the whims of King Henry VIII in England. But there's so much more to Thomas More than just his death. He was a family man. He was a lawyer who rose to the level of Lord Chancellor in England, basically Henry VIII's right-hand man. And yet he never lost his desire to grow daily in holiness. And he understood his work as a lawyer and then as a statesman to be at the service of God. And when things got to a head at the start of the Protestant Reformation, and he realized that he was going to have to choose between his political career and his faith, he quietly but firmly chose the route of faith, fidelity to the Pope and to the Catholic Church. And I was always drawn to that witness that he offers us today.
We recently, my family and I, have you heard of the Saints Alive podcasts?
Yes, yes.
So we were listening to the one that they did about St. Thomas More, and I remember, I think it was my daughter said, "Why would he not just say that it was okay? I mean, then he could live." Their simple way of
Yeah.
looking at it, like, "Oh, he doesn't wanna die. Why just say that it's okay to divorce?" And, his what was it, Catherine of Aragon or someone that he wanted to, and then marry Anne Boleyn.
Yes,
Anyway,
that's right. That's right.
yeah, and I said, well, because he's trying to do what God would want him to do, and it was really hard to explain it to them without, I don't know, it was, it's a intense subject for children, especially because my oldest is only 7,
Mm-hmm.
and the other one listening is 5 now. So it it really got me thinking though, because so many little decisions throughout the day that we have where we could just take the easy route. And
Mm-hmm.
I when you were speaking about your journey of deciding whether or not to enter into religious life and
Mm-hmm.
trying to figure out God's will versus your will, I feel like there's a lot of parallels between you and Thomas More in that regard, of where you could just take that easier route and no one would have shamed you for it or blamed you or, said anything against you. They would have understood, like, oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
And same with St. Thomas More, like, oh, sure, just, say what you need to say and be on your way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, so I see a lot of him in you and in the way that you live out your life. And I like that you mentioned that he was also just very intellectual, but that he was quietly firm in what he stood for and wasn't looking to be a martyr, but that in the end he was determined to be so and not fall into what the king was asking of him.
Mm-hmm. He was so extraordinarily human. There are no miracles that he performed during his life, to my knowledge. He was simply a husband, a father, a lawyer, a writer who contributed much to the life of the Catholic Church and to England during his life, and yet was always aware that underlying all of his thoughts and deeds and friendships was the need to draw closer to Christ. He actually discerned the religious life as a young man going to law school. He
Mhm.
stayed with a group of Carthusian monks who lived in the town of London and ultimately also died as martyrs later. Um, but he discerned that he would be able to serve God better as a chaste husband rather than a licentious priest. That's the line that that he himself used to describe his choice. And I kind of came to the opposite conclusion, that the Lord was calling me to be a chaste priest. And that doesn't mean that I'm at all better than Thomas More. It just means that I think of his example of adhering to the will of God without without discussion in a real sense. But he's extraordinarily human in the sense that he adhered to the will of God while struggling all the way, because he simply handed in his resignation. He didn't make a public protest of anything. He didn't explain why he resigned as Lord Chancellor. He just retreated to his home. And I think he was hoping that Henry would just kind of let him slink away. But Henry ultimately had a bad conscience about the affair, because he knew that if a man such as Thomas More was not willing to go along, it must be pretty bad. And More truly stood alone at the end of his life. So just the drama of being in a jail cell in the Tower of London with your wife and eldest daughter pleading for you to swear the oath and to just get rid of this scruple of conscience. Of all of the bishops of England during Thomas More's time, only one refused to go along with Henry VIII's desire to get this divorce and then start the Church of England, the Anglican Church, with himself as head. That was St. John Fisher. Besides John Fisher and Thomas More and a few Carthusian monks, almost no one stood up to Henry VIII. So that simple witness of courage is immense.
I, of course, am relating to the wife pleading
Yeah.
pleading with the husband, like, but I think that just makes his act, like you were saying, even more incredible that he did have this wife and daughter that were looking to him and not wanting him obviously to meet that fate, and that he still remained true to God above all else, which is
Mhm.
what we're all called to do, and so many of us struggling to do every single day in the little ways where, and I think probably that's what allowed him maybe in the end to do what he did, because it sounds like in his life he kept the little ways in line with what God was willing as well. And